Hello, welcome to Arc Studio Presents. I'm Micah Cratty, a WGA screenwriter and the head of writing at Arc Studio, the best screenwriting app in the world, and you can check it out at arcstudiopro.com. In just a moment, I'm going to bring onto the stage award-winning writer-director David Wain, and we're going to talk all about his writing process. I'm super excited to get into it and talk craft with the man who knows about the craft. You can feel free to ask your questions in the chat about his writing process or screenwriting in general, and I'm going to try to work in as many of them as I can as we go along. And if we have time at the end, we'll answer more, but I'm not sure if we're going to do that. Please like this video if you want, subscribe, turn notifications on if you want to know about our future events. And then just two quick announcements before David joins us. One, for this event, we're running a little sale, $40 off a year of Arc Studio Pro. I'm going to put that in the chat, a link or the coupon code at checkout. And then also, if you're looking to get some writing done this week, you can join me and usually about 100 other writers on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific for Write With Us, our live writing show that Arc Studio does. We do 3 timed writing sprints. So put like a timer up on the screen, play some music, get some writing done. And you can make progress, on your scripts, whatever you're writing, with the support of your community. And then during the breaks between the sprints, I answer screenwriting questions, and it's just like a really good time just to like set aside for your writing. So check that out on a Wednesday, and you can RSVP at arcstudiopro.com/events. I'll put that in the chat as well if you feel like showing up and getting some writing done. Now, without further ado, please put your virtual hands together for David Wain. David.
Yeah.
Way to go.
Yeah.
I like that. You got to bring the energy at the start, or otherwise it's just like a picture popping up on the screen.
I'm sure if this was a live event, the audience would be going crazy right now and we'd be feeding off that. So I'm just pretending.
Yeah, I'm feeling it like through the interweb. People there, we got some claps. There we go. It is happening. Woo! Hello. Yeah. Courtney bringing it. Awesome. David, so glad you're here. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Tyler Zach 7 showed up.
Oh, I was worried he wasn't going to come.
Yeah.
So Tyler Zach 7 is here. So that's great. We can get it going. David, looking handsome and athletic. The fan club is out here. We are going crazy. Hello. I love it. Love the energy. All right. So we're going to get into your writing process. I feel like most people here probably know who you are, but I'm just going to do a little of the bio talk just so if people don't know. But David Wain is the director and co-writer of 6 feature films, including Wet Hot American Summer, Role Models, Wanderlust, and They Came Together. How many are we at so far? And most recently, A Futile and Stupid Gesture. On television, Wain co-created, directed, and co-starred in The State, Children's Hospital, Stella, and 2 Wet Hot American Summer miniseries for Netflix. His most recent show is the Netflix action comedy series, The Hilarious Medical Police. And he's also the director and exec producer of a new show on Peacock right now, Mr. Throwback. So you've done a lot, David. But your heart, kind of where you came from, your home, was sketch comedy. What was the journey like from writing sketches in your dorm with your friends to writing, movies and TV shows?
I would say that the journey was very gradual and very organic for me. I was very lucky in a lot of ways. And I met the guys from The State early on in college, and they were who I learned from kind of. We did a lot of teaching of each other and exploring stuff together. And so that's the transition from writing sketches in college to doing a TV show to doing movies was along with this team and with partners. And, I did my first movie was with Michael Showalter, who was with me in my college comedy group, The State, which became MTV Group. So it was being part of a team and all of us doing this stuff together and learning it together. And so it felt very organic, I guess, is the answer.
I mean, when you're writing today, does it feel like you're just doing the same thing on a larger scale that you were doing back then?
Yes, big time. Very much so. And I feel like, I've said many times, because it feels so right. Like I when I was 12, I was running around with a video camera, making skits with my friends. And at 55, I feel like I'm doing very much the same thing. And always and throughout have done some just versions of that, sometimes with a much bigger budget and sometimes not. And It just feels part of a whole, which is nice. And people ask me, do you like acting better, or directing, or writing, or producing? And it's like, it does feel like these are just sub jobs of the same one job.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know, a lot of writers had the same thing. Like for me, I remember just being like a little kid in my friend's backyard playing like ninjas or Lost Boys or whatever, like in the wilderness, and just coming up with like a storyline as we go. And like, oh, now the wolves are attacking us. What do we do? And just sort of like, it's the same sort of play and character and story construction,
Totally.
just kind of in a more formal, a way. So how does sketch comedy influence your writing process? I mean, like,
well, I learned a lot. The state was 11 of us trying to get our material on the air and trying to get ourselves on the air in the show, both when we were doing live shows just at college and then throughout making TV shows. And so we learned a lot about how to just get your point across. I mean, that's what you need to do in sketch comedy anyways. You have to sort of get the premise out there as quickly as you can and as clearly as you can, iterate on it or do wherever it's going to go. And it was important to us doing sketch comedy that the pieces had a beginning, middle, and end that made sense. And that wasn't just like, here's a joke, here's more examples of the same joke, and then it's just peters out, which we felt like sometimes you see on other shows. And so just the discipline of telling a story quickly and clearly and making it funny. I learned that over and over again, and really learned those muscles doing the state. And I feel like those muscles are what I took to everything I did, and for better or worse, all the movies and TV shows I've worked on, I try to do the same thing, try to keep it sort of clear and dense and without fat, and just sort of cut to the chase.
Yeah, I feel like, a question I see a lot when I host Write With Us and just like on the internet is when you talk about the beginning, middle, and end, people are always wondering like, how do I end my scene? Or like, how do I know my scene is over? How do you know that? How do you know when it's time to like cut this thing and move on? Because you can always hit the joke another beat, right? Like, how do you know when it's like, this is when it's done?
I guess hopefully it's utterly clear. Like, to me, if it's almost like if you're asking that question, then you have to go back to your original premise and outline. Like I feel like I'm bastardizing remembering going to Robert McKee's course so many years, like 30 years ago or something. But it's that idea that the last scene, it has to be the last scene of a movie or the last beat of a sketch, either one or whatever, has to be the scene after which there can't possibly imagine another scene,
like this story is done. This whatever
is over. It's so obviously over, and so I guess that's what I would say. I mean, and of course, throughout the process of writing and then shooting and then editing anything, you're always realizing, oh wait, this scene's over way sooner than we thought, or you can come into it way later than you thought, and it's always that funny process of things you've held on to for years sometimes, and then as soon as you get to a certain part of the certain phase of it, you're like, oh no, cut all that.
Yeah. The kill your darlings moment, which is funny. Like, I feel like I used to have more trouble with killing your darlings until I like rethought of what it was. Like, the darling got me to the thing I needed to be. Like, it wasn't like I thought it was going to be the end result, but really it was a stepping stone. So it like still has value.
Sorry, I'm in a borrowed office working on this project, and the phone will be ringing from time to time.
That's great. I mean, feel free to answer it if you want to take some calls. While we're
it's not my office, so it wouldn't be for me.
Yeah, we could make it funnier. Sorry. No. I was just gonna say, sketch comedy feels like, I was looking back at Wet Hot American Summer like this weekend, and you could very feel like that it's affected. Sketch comedy's affected how you approach characters, because like in a sketch, like you said, you get to the point very quickly. It's like you instantly know who this character is, like what their deal is or what they want, and it seems like that's kind of in some ways or definitely influenced how you approach character
yes. Depending on like some of the movies, like They Came Together and Wet Hot American Summer to some degree, and other things I've done, they are sort of more of a sketch comedy flair to them, or so where there's a shorthand where you're like, this is that guy, and you're not even, and then maybe under the surface, there's a little bit more heart and originality and sort of actual feeling and observation behind the character. But a lot of times, the idea in sketch comedy is you're like, that's this guy that you should recognize immediately so we can move on and get to the point. And that's how I always thought it was fun when we were doing that show, Children's Hospital. We were doing 4 usually separate plot lines that interwove over the course of the storyline, which is really an hour-long shows type of structure, but we did those episodes in 11 minutes. And so you had to really depend on the general cultural knowledge of the audience to be like, we get what this is. We don't have to explain anything. Just go.
Right. Like they've seen also like medical shows and they understand like what like the beats are. So
and similarly also they understand when it's just filler, like the plot lines that aren't important, or don't matter. Yeah. So we just cut that stuff out.
I mean, I feel like one of the other commonalities between sketch to now is that you collaborate a lot on work, which I feel like sometimes people have questions with like in the line between collaboration and kind of work by committee or writing by committee, where like one can be a fruitful process that like builds something better, whereas like the idea of kind of doing something by committee like flattens it out or kind of makes it lack a singular voice. Like how do you in collaboration give a singular voice or a comedic voice to a piece writing?
You're absolutely right, and that's the magic sauce is if you can find the collaborators that are in sync and complementary to the point where it's the former, not the latter, where where the sum is greater than the parts instead of just watered down. And I think it's anytime that you're working, whether it's writers working together or whether you're collaborating with producers or studio or actors or whoever else is chiming in, and your script or your project becomes the least offensive to all parties involved, then that's how terrible things get made all the time. But the incredible thing is when you have a group, and that's what was so special about The State. And then for me later, Stella, and then working with Ken Marino on movies and Michael Showalter, we just sort of have enough of an overlapping brain about what it all is, that's what a great writing partnership is. And it definitely is not something that you stumble upon all the time. And it's very lucky when you do.
When it goes wrong in like sort of the bad path, have you over time recognized when that's happening and figured out ways to get off that path, or is it sort of you're kind of screwed if you're in that situation?
I have tried to avoid those kind of situations throughout my career, probably much to the detriment of my wallet and a certain measure of success, because I have such a distaste for that sort of warmed over, unoffensive committee type way of creativity, that for the things that I've cared the most about, I've really tried to get myself in situations where it's the least amount like that. That said, I've worked on things like, for example, in Role Models, that was a project that existed before Ken Marino and I got involved. And then we came in and worked with Paul Rudd to rewrite that script. And we were very much of a brain, but then we were working with this producer, Mary Parent, who had been the chairman of Universal and who's a huge producer and very mainstream mindset. And yet her notes were so great. Like she pushed us very specific ways every day, every moment to like hit certain things in certain ways that at points we were like, oh my God, this is exhausting. Or like, what are you talking about? But then it ultimately made the movie a million times better, I think, so there's no absolutes to this sort of thing for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like when a producer is good, they are bringing a perspective that you don't have that is helpful to the process.
And I think the best producers, they bring perspective you don't have, but they also are really supporting and trying to garden the vision of, or the talents of the people who are actually doing the on the ground work, whether the writers and all the collaborators in a movie. I think the weaker producers are sort of letting their ego drive it too much and being like, if I could, I would be the one doing all this, but
Right.
I'm, trying to overlay your own sensibility instead of just saying, here, I'm going to use my point of view to help you grow your sensibility.
Right. The producer who really wanted to be a writer and sees
Right.
this as their opportunity to do that.
Right.
Before we leave the sketch comedy subject behind, Paul wants to know, all I want to know is when the Stella movie is coming out.
The second that someone says go, I'll do it.
So the second someone writes a check.
Yeah. Or whatever. I don't know. Yes, I would do that in a second.
Awesome. So let's get a little bit into the writing process. Where are you finding ideas for movies? Are you actively pursuing them, like sitting down at your desk or with other people?
I mean, if you want to find the funniest ideas, all you got to do is open up the newspaper.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, yeah.
But I mean, honestly, pretty much every idea for like the biggest things that I've done or the most exciting things that I've done has been so organically, like just brewing up for a long time and then just like, yeah, maybe we should do that idea, like no, that's not, I mean, I guess it depends, but it's on one hand, I loved getting the discipline on the state where we had to just generate, for every sketch that we did on the state, we wrote like 50. And so it was constantly like, what's another idea? What's another idea? What's another idea? And being the opposite of precious about it, just being like, oh, okay, try something else. And just the muscle of and learning the lesson of quantity is as important as quality was something early on that really, really helped me.
Did you have to learn? I mean, was that hard, like to sort of subsume your ego? Like, was that easy for you or
No, it was hard. It was definitely hard because you're like, but this sketch is the thing that really mattered. Like, I need to get it. And you're like, no, just let it go. Next one. There's always another one. There's always another idea. There's always another joke. And of course, yes, something special it's the balance. It's funny. You were asking me about Killing Your Darlings. To me, one of the things I've learned over the years is finding that balance. Cause it's like, yes, kill your darlings, but also recognize those darlings that you shouldn't kill and like know the difference. And that's really hard. Sometimes, I mean, it's like, what about, there's jokes that I've held on to and fought my collaborators and fought the studio and fought everybody and said, no, I believe in this. It's funny. Please, let's keep this. I know I'm fighting a fight and rowing upstream, and then I'm so happy I did because it's something that feels right to me in the end, but.
Have you ever fought that fight and then just been like, oh, I was wrong?
Totally. In fact, our new show, Mr. Throwback, which is on Peacock right now, there are jokes in there on both sides that I fought for really hard that I'm like, oh, maybe I didn't need to fight for that. And there's more to the point. There's jokes that I fought against because I was the director of this show and producer, but the guys who wrote it and the showrunners were awesome. But there were times when I'm like, guys, you don't need this joke. It's too much. It's added on like, and I made a big case for them to take it out and they overruled me and they were right. But it's all subjective. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
So
when you're talking about like the ideas that you don't kill, like, I feel like, writers, you have a lot of ideas for a movie, a TV show, whatever. How do you know when an idea is worth pursuing as a movie? Like, this is the one that actually I should throw my.
Feels like it's so much gut. It's just like, this feels right to me. I feel like, especially for me, I think there are other screenwriters who know better how to like follow the trends or follow the market or try to look ahead and be like, oh, next year, this time, I think people will want to see a movie about this. Whatever. I've never been able to do that. I've never really been interested in that. And I don't think I would be good at that. And so I've just been like, I think this feels funny to me. And then if a little bit later, I still feel like it's funny, I'm like, oh, let's stick with this. And then, we wrote that movie, They Came Together, in 2003, and nobody wanted to make it. And I just didn't shut up about it for 10 years until finally we found a way to make it. Like, I feel excited. When I get giddy about like the chance to make something, I will not let go of it. And then I guess I can't remember what you asked me, but
knowing when an idea is worth pursuing. Yeah.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the one that you're going to throw yourself in. And it's
You
also
never
even
know.
harder.
It just has to feel it. Yeah. And there, but we've gone off on so many tangents. I keep forgetting what I was going to say, but the idea that so the discipline of coming up with going into the state office on a Monday and being like, okay, this is my job. I got to come up with 20 ideas right now. And don't be precious about them. Or it could be this, or it could be this. Because I love that. And having that muscle of just being like, and then sometimes I would sit down with Ken Marino. I've done this a couple of times and said, okay, we're locking ourselves in a room for 7 days and we're going to emerge with a rough draft of a screenplay. And we would not have an idea. So we'd be like, okay, between today we can brainstorm, but by the end of today, we have to have committed to an idea. And then the next day we have to finish an outline and then we write the script and then we just have something to start with. And that's how we wrote Wanderlust. And that's how we wrote our movie, The 10. And so those were, the discipline of forcing yourself to do it is valuable. And yet at the same time, even those movies and everything, whether it's Stella, Wet Hot American Summer, they were just organic outgrowths of retrospectively obvious ideas.
Yeah. Question here from Jake. How, if at all, is the process approach for writing more absurdist movies like They Came Together, Wet Hot American Summer differ from writing more narratively grounded movies like Wanderlust and Role Models? Do you see a process differently between those movies, or is it similar?
Well, I mean, they were all different. The processes of those four that you mentioned were definitely very different. I mean, they were different situations, but I don't know that I would bifurcate them by absurdist or less absurdist, even though they were. But in each case, I'm always focusing on story spine and the basic stuff, the stuff that you learn for me, it was Robert McKee or whatever, or in class. It's just the basic storytelling elements and making sure that every scene has a point and everything leans to another. And even in the most absurdist ones, that's still super important, I think, because if it's just a string of jokes, it gets boring almost immediately. And to me, anyway, so no matter how funny they are, so you have to have a spine that holds it together. But I guess in ones like Wanderlust or Role Models, we just spent a little more time on those were the two movies that we did for a big studio where we had to know that we had to sort of hit a bigger, wider target, and it couldn't be just stupid. And so we just focused on that more, and one of the things I liked about the process of Role Models was it started as a script that we were handed, but at its core is a very, at the time it was a very standard issue, R-rated buddy comedy that a studio might make. Not bad, or that's not even a judgment. It's just that's what it was. And we were like, could we overlay our sensibility into this, not without undercutting, but in a way to serve what that is instead of trying to undercut what that is, So what I think the Role Models works to me because it fully is that. It is a R-rated studio buddy comedy, but it also complementarily, hopefully, has our little stripe of the Wayne Marino State, Stella, whatever.
Awesome. You mentioned story spine and the importance of that. What is your approach to outlining? How do you have this kind of a process you go through?
Well, it's always changing, but both because, every time I sit down and write something, I'm a little different, and I'm the compilation of everything I've done before and thought about before, and also depending on if I'm doing it by myself or with a partner and who the partner is. But pretty much always work with an outline, start with an outlining process that's pretty extensive before actually writing a draft. And we've done it on cards or on Scrivener. I've done it on Arc Studio many times. And although almost always at some point or another, it goes back to index cards. I feel like that just seeing all of it on a physical wall for me, or on a desk, whatever, is sometimes
I've got some right there behind me. Just it's great when you.
There's something about physical cards that is irreplaceable at some points in the process. But it's also often outlining, re-outlining. Write a draft, then outline what you wrote, and then go back. But I try to keep it simple and just be, bullet points and headlines and and try to act 1, act 2, act 3, or whatever it is, and say, and then this happens and this happens. Try not to get bogged down in too much specifics or dialogue, but try to remember jokes if you have them. And then at a certain point realize, okay, there's only so much you can do until you start actually writing it. Then you start writing and see where it goes. But and it's that same process throughout the writing of just being having the energy and the patience to say, like, okay, wrote that 30 pages, not great, start again, but also to recognize, wait, there's something great here, and sometimes when something goes through so many drafts, Wanderlust, Role Models had gone through many drafts and many writers before we even got there. And then we ourselves did so many different versions and drafts so fast as we were leading up to shooting. And inevitably, there's amazing stuff that comes out that you lost in the shuffle or you forgot about because it was 10 drafts ago, and you cut it because it didn't work then, but the reason it didn't work is long gone, and that character is not even in it anymore. So now look at it again. So, you can never, it's so much to keep track of, but that I will say, not to be a commercial for Arc Studio, that's the most incredible thing. The feature where you can look at one line and then just see the entire history of, with a keystroke of like what that line was from the draft one.
Yeah, I will also say the stash is really cool, where you can cut the line and store it for later, and then drag it back into your script when it works again. When you're talking about the outline, you mentioned Robert McKee and stuff. Are there certain signposts in your script structure that are important to you, like having a big midpoint or a big inciting incident, or do you have a kind of specific structural act kind of things that you're like, I need to have these?
I feel like no more or less than the ones that you always have to have, like having the right inciting incident and having the right, whatever I'm definitely not a fan of rigid rules exactly, but I do feel like those basic things, whatever you want to label them, having an inciting incident that takes you to an act 1 turn of some kind, that takes you through act 2, and then building to a climax, and a point of no return of some kind and a conclusion. I have sometimes thought more sort of literally in those terms and sometimes not, but I at the same time, I do feel like if the sort of screenwriting book Save the Cat mistake is definitely to start with that, that can be really awful and sort of deadening for a project. I feel like you have to just start with what's exciting and what feels viscerally interesting, and then take a step back from it and then look at the shape of it and maybe structurally this needs to be put a little more towards the classic thing.
When you're figuring out the structure, do you feel a tension between sort of the plot or story and the comedy, in terms of this is happening and we could do 1 gag here, or we could do 10 gags here, and it's going to get bogged down? Is it just kind of a natural feel?
I don't know. Yeah, not really, because I feel like you can feel when it doesn't want that. I don't know. I feel like the gags, even the dumbest, silliest gags, are in service of something, although I might be lying. Like there's a project that we're hopefully making soon, a new movie that is there are so many needless and random detours that is the funniest parts of the movie to me, like that you definitely don't need to tell the story. But I guess, yeah, it really, it's interesting. It is so just instinctual to me. Like you're just like, this just feels funny. Like you've got to grind the story. I mean, like, for example, in Wet Hot American Summer, when the comedian Alan Shemper gets up on stage in the talent show and does like joke after joke after joke, it's like grinding the plot to a halt just for nothing, to me is awesome. Like, you know, and right during the end of Act 3, like right when you don't want that to happen, you know, normally. And I think, but so there's no absolutes to that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that also has to do with like intent. Like, I mean, I feel like sometimes conversations about writing movies are very one size fits all, but like someone going to watch Wet Hot American Summer has a very different maybe expectation or like for what this is going to be and like what they're looking for out of it than, you know,
and it's interesting. I mean, of course, and you know, plenty of people don't like that movie or don't feel like it doesn't work. And then there's also plenty of people who would watch Wet Hot American Summer and say it's fine, but it's a very like niche, you know, specific blah 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 blah. And then some people are like, it's the greatest thing ever. It's the Rosetta Stone. But the what's funny to me sometimes is, from me and Michael Showalter, when we were writing that, we felt like we were really giving a very solid, you know, deeply thought out Robert McKee-esque structure to these multiple storylines and tying them together in a very sort of disciplined way that, and yet obviously for some people, they were just like, this is just a literally random collection of skits that are tied together. And so, you know, to each his own.
Yeah, I mean, that movie, like all the characters are very like defined character arcs. Right? Like I feel like there's like very classic structural things going on. They want things, they're pursuing goals, you know, like all these things that you taught me here.
And when we did our show Stella on Comedy Central, we also really tried to make those scripts kind of disciplined and clear. But it was funny because we thought we were just doing a funny show. We weren't quite so aware of just how weird it was and how different than the mainstream it was and how much obviously it was going to be canceled.
Speaking of those multiple plot lines on Wet Hot American Summer, what advice would you give a writer who's writing a multiple plot line, big ensemble piece like Wet Hot American Summer?
Well, I'm a big fan of those types of movies, which is why we did that. And I was thinking very specifically about like Nashville and Do the Right Thing and Dazed and Confused and Fast Times, you know, where you have all these different characters that are tied together. I would say multiple plotline, big ensemble piece. Make sure that the thing that ties all the stories together is clear and strong. So like in summer camp, last day of camp. So they're all very much tied together by a location, a situation, and a timeline that's very contained. So then all the different stories have a reason why they're all together. That's one thing I think retrospectively that I would say. And then I know that in the process of writing Wet Hot American Summer, which is now like almost 30 years ago, we had a lot more plot lines, and we took a lot out, or we combined characters and combined things and just tried to find the right balance where's too much, you know, where you're just not giving people enough air. And then another one is that to the best degree you can, which is not ever totally possible, try to come up with ways where the reason you're cutting from one to the next has a reason, instead of just randomly, and now let's check in with these people. Now let's check in with these people. Which again is inevitable to some degree. But
one thing I noticed, I recently watched Everybody Wants Some, and I was sort of thinking about some of these sort of movies that have like more like hangout movies too. And I noticed as I was rewatching Wet Hot American Summer that like it's helpful to have something at the end that everyone's looking forward to, like the talent show, or like in Everybody Wants Some, it's like their first practice, or there's like a party they're going to every night. And so it's like there is some sort of anchor kind of event or thing that like we're building.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial, or it needs that form. And if, you know, all the great of that thing, they're all heading towards something specific, whether, you know, whether it's like Do the Right Thing, where you don't know what it is, but you feel that it's coming, or Nashville, where it's very clear, like this, we're all preparing for this particular event, you know. And I know we're very deliberate in Wet Hot American Summer to make sure that we knew that the talent show was tonight, and then at a certain point through introduce this Skylab thing as like, okay, here's the threat, blah blah blah, as dumb as it is, you know, just as something to hang your hat on.
Moving on to the script, what does a first draft of a David Wain script look like?
I don't know that it's that different than in most first drafts, in that it's probably, you know, longer than what it will be and messier, and has you know, it has ideas and tangents and characters that won't end up being there or that aren't as formed. But I've heard about screenwriters who like have a very specific weird way of doing it. But, and you know, it's that they talk about a vomit draft where you just like write out everything you could possibly think of and just get, and I've done that, like where you just like type as fast as you can just to get something to the end. And but so yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what it is. I mean, I've written in different ways with different partners, like with Ken Marino and we always sat together on the screen and just did it, every word together. Whereas sometimes with Mike Showalter, I did that. As things went along with Showalter, he would write something and I would rewrite it and back and forth. And so we would say, let's Tom and Ben this, which was a reference to Tom Lennon and Ben Garant, who wrote a book about how they would do the outline. And then after that, they would pass the draft back and forth and not even talk about it. As I recall, I might be misquoting this, but they would give their notes on the draft just by rewriting it. And, you know, if they didn't like a joke, they cut it. And if the other partner liked the joke, they'd put it back in and then just see how it goes, and it goes along, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Are there certain things that like you don't worry about in a first draft in terms of like the jokes hitting, the dialogue being polished, the scene descriptions, or are there certain things that like in later drafts you'll care more about that aren't earlier?
Yeah, well, I mean, you try not to worry about anything, you know. I think we all have, I mean, I have some, I guess, level of OCD. Like I don't purposely leave in typos and spelling errors and stuff because the kids, I don't like to look at them. But yeah, I feel like you can't, it's hard to be a creator and a judge at the same moment. You know, I think you have to just see what comes out. And then, and I guess I don't have a very interesting answer. I've done things where you really, really just write and see what happens and then don't worry about it at all. And I've done other ways where like you write a line, like, maybe there's a better line. Let's go back, you know, and I feel like I've tried not even consciously, I've just like naturally tried every style of it.
Do you feel like when you're working with these different partners, you're sort of molding yourself to them, or you're picking up things along the way from each of them and sort of like turning into a super writer?
Well, the state was such an oddly specific phenomenon where, you know, people like me, and I wrote a lot with A.D. Miles, who was kind of like sort of adjunct part of the state, and Ken Marino and Michael Showalter and Joe Latrulio. And I feel like we have a certain hive brain that I feels like is not another person in some ways. And so I feel very connected. And I've also worked with other writers too, outside of my college comedy group. And yes, I feel like I'm always every time I collaborate with someone, whoever it is, I'm learning from them, and also I'm absorbing their thing and also probably giving it to them, and it's a combination. And but I feel like the projects that I try to write something with someone where our overlap is this project. So it doesn't feel like we're going to be working at cross purposes.
Here's a question from the audience. How do you handle keeping rewriting interesting? I feel like most people love the discovery stage, but stall out during the polish stage.
Well, to me, I feel like if it's still entertaining to me, then it's working. And if it's not, then it's not. Like, I was still laughing at jokes in Wet Hot American Summer 5 years into the process. And I was like, okay, those are working. One second. And so I guess obviously there's days when you're bored of it or tired or you're like, I'm enough with this, but then, you need a break, go take a walk. But ultimately you have to still be excited about it or get excited about it. And that's the hardest stuff, is when you're working for hire or when you're doing something that your heart's not in, but you have to for a job, which is part of the job and part of a career. And that's when you really have to manufacture it and just be like, whatever, I'm going to get excited about it. I have to pretend I'm excited about it and fake it till you make it. But
have you walked away from projects in that process of being like, I thought this was it and it's not?
I have, but in some cases I regret it. Like where I just like, you could have pushed through and like Michael Black always used to teach me in a way, like there's always anything can be figured out, like, or any joke, any premise can be worked into something decent, maybe not the greatest thing ever, but like that was part of the discipline too, of just like, here's the thing, just find a way to make it work, find something in it that's funny. And then you may, and then the last part of it about what makes it like truly special is out of your hands. Like, who knows how that's luck. That's partly luck.
Yeah. Kind of on a related note, when you're doing these multiple drafts, how do you hold on to the greatest moments? Do you ever feel like things are sort of getting lost in the shuffle?
All the time. I think that's I just think part of is just being aware of that pitfall. There are times when you're like, oh shit, we've just been rewriting this and we forgot the main thing that's funny about this, or we forgot the main point of the story, or like, and you just trying to keep your eyes on if you keep your eyes on the prize of the spine of what the whole thing's about, hopefully that won't happen as much. And sometimes you're just like, wow, this is like one of the greatest jokes I ever came up with, but it doesn't really make sense in this movie. So you just forget it or save it for something else.
Do you have jokes that like you wrote for one thing that came to life in another thing?
Oh yeah, especially particularly in writing with Showalter, I know that we part of what we sometimes overtly repeated jokes in one project to another that kept them in both. But yeah, I just think sometimes you're just like, this is so funny. And a lot of times you come up with something, you're like, oh my God, what if this happened? You're like, well, but we did that already in this other thing. And so you don't do it. But occasionally you'll be like, oh, we were going to do this in the other thing, but we didn't, or it got cut out. So let's do it in this.
Yes. We get it. We like a little less work in the next job. We've already done it.
But I mean, basically though, it's like songs or pieces of songs that you talk about with musicians. It's like, those things will come up organically. You can't just be like keeping all your file of all the jokes you wished you had used and like, how do I put this in? It'll fit in, and when it'll come back to you if it makes sense in the next thing. I guess.
I think there's a question that you probably get a lot. About
I agree with Mike C. Leach. This guy's a good interviewer.
Well, thank you. Let me just like put that up on the screen for myself. That's just a moment for me. But I feel like a question that you probably get a lot is how much improv. So Tom is asking, do you approach specific scenes or moments in the script as specific improv opportunities, or is that more of an overall approach to the writing and filmmaking on set? How much in the script are you leaving space for improv, and how much is just kind of feeling it out in the moment on set as to what's going to be improv?
Well, I would say overall in my career of making things, there's probably quite a bit less improv than many people might think. and project to project, it varied widely. In Wet Hot American Summer, for example, there was almost no improv because it was shot with one camera, so fast, 35 millimeter, no budget, no time. And also just, we had 3 years to find the financing. So we really got that script pretty tight. And all the sort of random, whimsically weird moments were written down, or not all. There was definitely improv. There was a lot of improv that was great, but a big 90% of it was written down, I would say. Other things, depending on what it is, there was a lot more, depending on the collaborators, depending on the style, depending, the project I just did with Stephen Curry and Adam Pally, Mr. Throwback, had quite a bit of improv. And so it definitely just depends project to project, but I'm a fan of the craft of figuring it out on the page. And getting the art of the comedy down on the page, and then letting the actors elevate it to ways in places you could never imagine, but not requiring them to make up the words necessarily.
Are there, I mean, I'm sure this is probably true, but like, do you have things when you rewatch where the actor having done that elevation, like the audience is just like laughing at the part that wasn't like what you thought was going to be the funny thing, like in the scene, but like this other moment,
Well, of course, I mean, absolutely, without question, there's so many things that are the highlights of movies that you never thought were funny or didn't realize were going to be the best part. Like the scene with Paul Rudd cleaning a plate in Wet Hot American Summer, we were like, that was just a little utilitarian moment to show that how lazy he was, so that later when he throws kids out of a van, we set that up it was a setup scene, we thought, but it became one of the highlight scenes, just because he was so incredibly funny. Similarly in Wanderlust, the scene when he's getting himself psyched up in the mirror is definitely, I would say, to me, clearly the most remembered and liked scene in that whole movie. And the first half of it is word for word what we had written out, and then the second half is entirely Paul just going crazy, and me being sitting there just blown away, like, what is going on? This guy, oh my God. And so
I read, or I watched another interview where you were saying that like with Paul, it wasn't, I think, until you were in the editing room that you saw, like, you kind of realized like how good he was.
Well, all the way back in the beginning in Wet Hot
American Summer, yeah.
I think I was biased by the fact that I had seen him in movies like Object of My Affection with Jennifer Aniston, where he was just sort of like the random romantic lead actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, oh, I frankly just didn't give him enough credit to realize how fucking brilliant he was early on. But then once we were in the edit room with Wet Hot, I'm like, oh my God.
It's kind of interesting though, because like I feel like when you mentioned like not as much improv on set as people might think, but like if you're writing with other people, you sort of have a preset in a way, right? Where like you're not alone, you can talk to someone. Are you riffing? How much of the dialogue is being kind of improvised in that moment of like riffing?
Sometimes, so much. I mean, that's why writing comedy with a partner is so important, or so for me is like it's saying it back and forth and riffing it out so often is what it is. And not only that, it's also doing it through table reads and doing it through rehearsals. I mean, there's so many times up until the actual camera's rolling to find those moments. And then also, though, I have found a lot of my favorite, funniest things are happening when I'm sitting with a partner at the keyboard typing, and I'll just type things out just often as a joke to entertain my writing partner, but then we're like, wait, or just put it in.
I think there's something about those crazy moments. Like I remember like being on staff, I would like the pitches that I thought about the most never made it in. But if there was something where I was just like, all right, this is insane, but like, what if this happened? Like that is like, yes, let's do that. And there's something about like it being not
well, and it's the classic thing of like, the song that the artist spent 1 minute writing right before the session becomes the biggest hit they ever had, and I felt that happened to me and and Ken sometimes on the state, where we like meticulously work on a sketch forever, but then the thing we thought of like a minute before the pitch meeting is the thing that becomes the real, but
Yeah.
it's a misnomer, because your whole life is leading up to being able to do that.
Sure. Right. It's like the famous Picasso scene or story where he like draws a picture on a napkin and charges the guy $1 million. And,
Right.
and he's like, it's not $1 million for this minute. It's for the years of my life, like being able to draw this in a minute.
Right.
Do you have any other like tips? I feel like dialogue is a thing that often people struggle with. You mentioned writing with a partner is very helpful. Do you have any other tips or strategies for writing good dialogue?
Actually, wasn't it David Mamet who said something like it? You just gotta have to have some talent for it. But I feel like I don't know that I have any specific tips for that. I think it goes with the rest of that part of the writing, is you just have to feel like it feels real. Like the minute it feels written, it does help. I would definitely say for writers who aren't used to being actors, like absolutely make sure you say it out loud and make sure it sounds right. Make it sound like it sounds like a character. And then the other pitfall to really be careful of is make sure the characters are in your mind clearly enough so that you don't have two characters that sound the same, or that you could switch the lines with each other and it wouldn't make a difference. Then something needs to be more delineated. I know, and with the exception being on Children's Hospital, we literally just randomly assigned storylines and complete character arcs back and forth between characters based on what actor was available, and that was just part of the point.
I mean, I feel like in like the absurdity kind of realm, there's like a tricky balance there, because you have so much freedom. Or like in Wet Hot American Summer, you can just go off on a riff where like they're shooting up heroin in like a flop house, for like 30 seconds, and then there's no consequences. They just like go back, and the audience is like, yeah, that's fine. Like that's gotta feel very liberating in some sense, that you can sort of like keep a story going while having moments that are just kind of off the wall.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, anyone who's seen what I've always been excited about, like this using the fact that it's fake. It's all film is artifice, to be able to say, okay, well, why not just do that? And like, why can't one character suddenly start gliding across the room as if they're able to fly or whatever? But at the same time, I've always found it interesting that it doesn't mean like just literally anything can happen. There's like sort of an internal set of rules for each thing that I have and so sometimes people would, for example, send in scripts for Children's Hospital or anything that we've done and be like, see, it's like this. It's just anything happens. I'm like, well, to me, there's more of a structure and an idea behind it, even if it is utterly absurdist and undercutting and weird and detouring, depending. But it's got to be in your own way.
Are those kind of things, those rules, things you can articulate, or is it a gut thing where like it just feels right to you?
Well, sometimes Children's Hospital was the one time that I had the experience of really being a showrunner, where I was overseeing other directors and writers sometimes. And we had a little bit with Wainy Days as well, where you're trying to explain a really silly sensibility to somebody else. And we did come up with certain things that we would say, look, I mean, for example, on that show, the behind the scenes characters that we presented that were like the fake actors that were on the show, we wanted to make sure that those characters never had any continuity problems, like that everything all tracked in that story because the story. But overall, it is hard to describe, and that's why when we did our show Stella on Comedy Central, it was a lot of work, and we were like, we need to bring in writers for this. But then thinking about it more, we were like, we can't. There's just it's just not. You cannot explain to somebody how to write this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's a thing in television shows, which I've seen, is that like the showrunner has a particular voice. They have a staff. They've tried to assemble a staff who can like do their voice, but then there's like this trade-off where you're either screwed up front because you like don't have the time to teach them, or then if you don't do that, you're screwed in the back end, because like now you have to write everything because like your staff didn't ever kind of learn to.
I feel like in the best series though, they let the writers have enough rope to evolve it to their voice a little too, so that a great series to me, I think, like Breaking Bad or whatever, is the brains and hearts and minds of all those writers, being corralled under this incredible vision of one creator, But if
and also, I mean, because I was a script coordinator on Better Call Saul season 1, and like that was a show where they did like they train, like the writers get notes, like they are taught also, like they take the time to do that, which I think is one of the reasons why it has that continuity.
I wish there was a seminar on Arc Studio where I could learn more about that.
But I've talked a little bit about it in some other things. Yeah, come to write with us. People ask me, I'll talk about working on
because you did have the guy from Better Call Saul, right?
I had, Tom Schnauz did one. If you guys look on our YouTube channel,
trying to joke about it. But anyway, well, I will say the Breaking Bad Better Call Saul, I think, is maybe the best writing in television ever. And I think it feels to me, I don't know anything about the behind the scenes like you do, but like it feels to me like it's the right corralling of people's creative brains, instead of just saying, can you ape exactly me, like, because I don't have enough of me to do it,
David, I just want to check in. How are you doing on time? We could kind of do some questions?
Let me check one thing and I will give you an answer.
Worries.
I got a few more minutes.
All right, great. Let's do some questions from the audience here. Can you give any tips for writers who suddenly lose their inspiration in writing their story in the middle of making it?
In the middle of writing it, I would just say, I mean, sometimes you just do need a break, like, and that's real, and whether it's a walk around the block break or a week long, think about something else really deeply and really get away from it. I mean, that's a valid use of time if you have it. And then I would just say, try to think about what it is that made you excited when it did make you excited, and really try to get into it. And of course, there's no right answer. So there's times when it's just the right move to just move on and drop it. You can't ever know, but I would say more often than not, people probably drop things when they don't need to. I mean, most writers or people who want to be writers just start things and don't even finish them, and they're like, well, I just have whatever excuse, but it's just, no, sit down and fucking do it, and just get it done, finish it. And then maybe it's not that good. Then it's fine. Then you go to the next one. But
I feel like it's much easier to come back to a bad script that's finished than a bad script that's half finished. Like if you can just push through and just finish that shitty draft, like you can leave it in a drawer for a while and then come back to it. But if it's half finished and you leave it for a long time, like
exactly,
probably never going to actually.
And also, I mean, you can never underestimate the importance of just ass meets chair. Just sit down and put in the time. Like most people just don't do that. Most people just don't actually sit down and just try. And if you don't feel inspired, so poo for you. It's just like, sit down and do it. Write something. And then sometimes all it takes for me, this is my own lesson I teach myself all the time, is like, I'm like, I can't do this. I don't feel it. I'm like, well, I'm just going to, who cares? I'm not allowed to check YouTube or whatever. I'm going to just sit here in front of a blank screen until I write something. And eventually something will inspire you in what you're doing if you just let yourself get into it.
I feel like it's so funny that there are some small things. Like I found that just like my office is kind of in like a garage. And if I just need to write, I just leave my phone in the house. Like just doing that, I feel like it's just, you're like increasing your odds of doing something a little bit by like, and if you do enough of these little things, then you're giving yourself.
To me, the most useful of those kind of tricks to me has been the Pomodoro method, where you set a timer for 25 minutes where you are absolutely not allowed to do anything except what you're setting out to do. And if you have to go to the bathroom or you have to want to check something or somebody texts you, wait, just 25 minutes. Got to do it. And to me, when I really need to do something and I'm having trouble keeping my attention, that's what helps.
Well, this will be my last Arc Studio plug. We have a 25-minute timer in there, so you can use that to do timed writing sprints. Maybe one more question.
Sure. How about let's do a few more rapid fire.
Okay, rapid fire. All right, this is a weighty one. Do you choose theme before you lock your premise, or do you discover it while working on the draft? How do you approach theme?
Both. I would say, well, I would never force it, but sometimes it's part of what inspires something that you're writing, and then sometimes it will change, and then sometimes you discover it later. I don't think there's a rule about theme. You should think about it at points for sure. But like Wanderlust, in a way, started with a theme, and then we figured out the story, and other things not.
How long does it take for each part? Outline, first draft, etc.
Outline takes 22 days. First draft is always 28 days, and then the second draft is 19 days, and then third draft is 14 days.
And if there's like a leap year within there, does that affect it at all? Or
no, no. Who knows? I don't know. Depends.
Yeah,
everything depends.
But do things generally like fall into a rhythm where they take similar amounts of time, or is it just completely different every time for you?
It's so. I mean, if the feature films, I would say I know I've co-written, I guess 5 of the 6 feature films that I did, and then each one was a totally different process in so many different ways. And then I've probably written another 10 screenplays or more, probably many more. And yeah, it's never, it depends on a million factors. So it's hard to say. Do I write a treatment? Yeah, sometimes.
Is that for yourself or is that
outline? It depends. Yes, sometimes whoever's paying you need to write a treatment, or to me, a treatment and outline can be very similar, or it's a scriptment, and it just depends.
This is kind of fun. If you had to make a Wet Hot style film with that budget today, how would you do it?
Meaning, I don't know. I don't understand the question.
Yeah, I actually misread it. Sorry. The question I was wondering is if you were to remake a Wet Hot American film today, and you had, in my mind, when I saw budget, I thought unlimited budget. Like, what would you do?
I mean, I had a flavor of that when we did the Netflix Wet Hot. We had like a much more real amount of money than, it still was tiny for anything, but I had the real life opportunity to revisit that whole world on the Netflix thing, and it was amazing. It was fascinating to do that and to use modern tools and a totally different, we shot that in a very different way, very, very different way, but tried to emulate the same feel, and so it was interesting to do Wet Hot American Summer again, but this time with a writer's room and shooting digital with 2 cameras and like having none of the actors available. It was like a whole different set of challenges.
Speaking of your older stuff, do you ever get frustrated when you watch your older stuff and you realize either as a writer or a director, there's a better way to do a scene that you didn't realize at the time?
Yes, definitely. Particularly in my older stuff, like I joke about, I always think I made a student film with Ken Marino where the idea is that he's offering a set of tickets to somebody as like a gesture of love. And so just to show you, like, he has the tickets right here, and this was the frame like this. And so instead of just tilting down so you could see it, I was like, Ken, you have to hold the tickets up here. Like, here are the tickets. And so that became like a shorthand with me and Ken whenever we're doing something convoluted. But as with all artists, I guess, I often feel like an imposter and I have no clue what I'm doing at all. So yes, there's a million things where I'm like, oh, I could have done that differently. But I also have this weird brain game I play with myself where once a movie's done or a TV show, I really do feel like it's done and it is what it is and it's perfect for what it is.
That's awesome. I also feel like if you look back, and could be for a produced thing or like a script, and if you find something you're like, oh God, why did I do this? Like you can see that as a sign of growth. Like you've grown as an artist. So like, don't be upset that you did it bad in the past. Be happy that you like can see it now,
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
And, role models is filled with jokes that would be considered problematic and that I cringe at a little bit today, but it's a product of those people at that time, one of whom was me.
All right. To end with, I think we can do the classic. Do you have any like advice or words of wisdom you would give to aspiring?
What was the last hour? My God.
I think I want it distilled into one sound.
Oh, okay. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. No, really, I don't know. I mean, I will say that I guess one thing that comes to mind is this is the thing that Michael Showalter taught me when we were at Brown University, because we were writing sketches for the state, and I felt like sad because they weren't taking a lot of my sketches. And he was like, it's because you're not writing a lot of sketches. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, have you noticed like everyone else was writing like 30 and you're writing 4? And I'm like, oh yeah. And so that notion of quantity is very important, not just quality. Like, just keep going up to bat. So I guess, and try not to be precious about like, well, this didn't work out and this is the only thing. Like, just then try another, then try another, then try another. If you want to stick with it.
I think that's great. I think one thing I see a lot with writers is that it's very focused on this moment in time. Like, I have this script, I need to like sell this thing kind of, but like that it is a process that like you can produce more, right? Like there is a quantity thing that like your odds go up if you just keep writing things.
Yeah.
Like eventually something can hit.
But also you gotta be smart. You can't just keep whacking. You have to try to come up with decisions. Also, by the way, I have no idea how to design a career, and I've had so many years-long periods where I've had no success. So nobody knows anything.
Yeah, awesome. Well, David, I think that's nobody knows anything is a great thing to end on. Everyone, I'm going to put the link for the sale again if you want $40 off a year of Arc Studio Pro.
I do highly recommend, and this is not being a commercial. I just think Arc Studio is a very, very, very helpful tool. It is the only thing I use to write screenplays now. I haven't used Final Draft in a long time.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's fantastic, and I'm excited. I'm fortunate to work with them. But yeah, David, thank you so much for taking. I know you have a very busy day. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and I'm sure. I want to thank the audience, by the way, for like being so participatory.
Yes, these are great questions all around. I really appreciate it.
They were great questions. All right. If you guys want to come to write with us on Wednesday, come write with me at Wednesday, 1 p.m., arcstudiopro.com/events to RSVP for that. And I think with that, we will say farewell. So
does the chat keep going? I'll spend the next 4 minutes answering chat questions if you want.
Yeah, go for it. I think it does keep going. So see everyone. Bye.